Welcome back to Unlikely Intersections. We're going to change gears today because in episode 66, we left a little teaser that we're going to create a master class. But our master class is going to be in two phases, and the first phase is actually going to be the making of a master class. So we really want to give our listeners a chance to see how it happens. Terry, I think this will be a lot of fun.
This is going to be a lot of fun because we're going to give the listeners the opportunity to see behind the scenes all the idea generation that's going to come from this, how we go about discussing what's going to be a part of the master class, what's not going to be the master class. They'll see some knockdown, drag out conversations between us as to how we put this together. So it should be fun. And we thought that we owed the viewers these types of, I guess, episodes to see that everything that we do, even though the content is great, we still have to have those behind the scenes kinds of conversations and work out how we're going to do things.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, there's a lot of times sloppy. It's it's not quite a blooper reel, but there probably will be some bloopers in
Yes,
it. And
yes.
it really kind of makes me think about there's such a volume of master classes out there, right? And they have a lot of value sometimes, and many other people could also create classes that add value. And our hope, or my hope, is that by showing how we get there, and we can't show the whole thing because there'll be lots of hours of preparation that are not on screen,
That's
but we'll hopefully have a representative sample of what it looks like. I think maybe it can help some other people, and we can really share a lot of knowledge out there, which is what it's all about.
I think it will be extremely helpful. One, because we've heard that what you guys really do are master classes anyway. So now what we're going to do is create a master class, and we're going to go through the whole process of ideation, the dialogue, the research, the back and forth of what happens when people collaborate, and more specifically when people co-create, because this is truly a co-creation right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, and I think one of the first things we got to do is sort of maybe justify, why does anybody want to listen to our master class? What expertise do we bring that's unique from everybody else? And I would sort of start that out from a foundational element is that for any of us in the world, our experience is tiny.
Yes.
We live in a 4.5 billion year old planet. If we're lucky, we get 100 years.
Yeah,
so we've only got a tiny bit of knowledge. But the more we can share, the better. And each of us has a series of robust experiences over the course of our lives, whether it's been in corporate America, whether it's been in healthcare, small or large, whether it's been in the coaching realm, any of that. So I think our qualifications really speak for themselves. And if they don't, then people don't have to watch the master class.
That's right. And I think what's so attractive about this is the fact that, again, when we began the show as Unlikely Intersections, we talked about how we met, how different our backgrounds were, right? But we came to a point of agreement where we began to co-create Unlikely Intersections. And so with given those differences that are actually our strengths, we can now create a master class based upon your experience as an executive, a surgeon, based upon my experience as a corporate exec, and then based upon our experiences of how we grew up, what your life was like, and now we're bringing all of this together from a very unique perspective. And let's not just say that as a white male and as an African American male, our perspectives are different, but we found a way to connect all the dots, and we think that that'll be extremely valuable in creating this masterclass.
And how often do we see in any realm, whether it's somebody we're working with in our professional roles or whether it's any of tons of material that's out there, there is a lot of talk about why something should be and a ton of theory.
Yes.
And what we want to do actually is put some meat on the bone and actually pragmatically go through, okay, this is what it can look like. And I'm biased, of course, as we all are, but one of the things that we have done through the entire history of our series of Unlikely Intersections podcasts is we have demonstrated inclusion.
Yes.
We have demonstrated these principles that we talk about in theory. And so I hope that begins to translate as well, because it's really important, I think, for our listeners, if they want to really begin to capture what it means to capitalize on the robustness of different perspectives, then we give a real example just by what we do.
Absolutely. And when you think of theory and you think of surgery, you're not theorizing in surgery. You're applying, right? So that application happens in surgery. When you're in a corporate setting and you have numbers to make, there's no theorizing around making the numbers. You either do or you don't. It's black and white. In surgery, it's black and white. The job was done. The patient is better. The number was 10 million. We came in at 10 million and one. So that's practical application. And given that knowledge, experience, and wisdom that we've been able to gather in our careers, I think it says that we know a little bit about application as well.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the concept of that you talk about a lot, the knowing-doing gap. And I'll use an example from surgical training. So there are all these great books called surgical atlases, and they show you basically components of how to do an operation. Maybe it's to repair an aortic aneurysm, or maybe it's to take out part of the intestine that's diseased. And it's really fascinating because it's a detailed description of how to do that thing. But there's a knowing-doing gap there, because what it doesn't show is how you get into the body and start that whole thing in the first place, right? Like there is an assumption that if you're using that atlas, you already know how to get where you're getting to work on it. And so part of our process is going to be, we would like to be able to show our viewers how to get there.
Yes.
And that's a big part of the process we hope to elucidate. It's not rocket science, but the path is rarely straight.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And oftentimes we talk about the why, the purpose for doing something. And as you just articulated, we need to move into the how. How do you do it? Because there are many people out there who understand what they need to do, but the key is they don't know how to do it. And that's what we really want to put on display in our masterclass. How do you go about creating what we're going to create?
And so for us, it starts as simple as, determining a topic.
Yes.
What do we want, how do we want to create the topic that gives an example of what this looks like? So we've tossed around ideas, is it mastery? Is it pursuit of mastery? Is it lots of different things we've talked about? And it comes down to, there's definitely a fundamental process, but at some point along the way, you can't continue the process until you make some decisions.
That's right. And, people like to say that we are products of our environment. I like to think that we are actually products of our decisions. And so part of what's most important with this is, how do we decide what we're going to title this? Because one, from a attraction marketing perspective, it has to be attractive to those who are interested in the course. What is it titled? So we have to consider what the listeners want versus what we might want to title it. And so there's that whole thought process and how we go back and forth.
Yeah, and I love that, like you talk a lot about you have to be something, right? It's not about doing something as much as it is ultimately, you have to be meditation. You have to be, whatever it is. And so from a process standpoint, it kind of makes me think, and it makes me wonder, is there such a thing as being a master? Or are you being the pursuit?
That's two excellent questions. And, we've tossed all that around, right? I don't know if anybody could ever be a master. But what I do know is if you consider yourself a master, that means that you always have to be the student.
Yeah. And you can't close yourself off. I think, one of the things that we see in certain environments, well-documented phenomenon, is that as you ascend in leadership and get into a smaller and smaller feedback loop where a lot of the feedback is perhaps tailored to be what is perceived that you want to hear, because people that are giving you that feedback are trying to advance themselves, and so they don't want to they don't want to be a counterforce to whatever they think your idea as a leader might be. So we have to really be careful in terms of that concept of mastery. So the leader ultimately has to figure out how to avoid that phenomenon, right? Like you cannot get yourself surrounded by a group of yes people.
Yes. You have to, you have to have people around you that serve as sandpaper. Sandpaper initially is abrasive, and you might not like the rub, but they're enabling you to become better, because ultimately what sandpaper does is it make all the rough edges smooth. So you don't need the yes people around. You want people who are going to challenge you and keep you uncomfortable so that you can have these thoughts of, how do I do this thing a little bit differently that's going to be beneficial to everybody? And if you're always getting yes, you're not going to make any progress.
And this process of pursuit, so to pursue something better, let's say, right? My bias is that it always starts with pursuing a better me. And that means a lot of things, right? There's a huge self-awareness piece that has to occur. And then there's another deeper awareness piece that says, who is it that's aware of what I'm feeling right now, whether that's a thought, whether that's an emotion, whether that's the limited viewpoint I may have of whatever's going on around me, and understanding what that means. But the process is about a pursuit of making myself better in any given situation.
I would agree. And the question I first asked him is, who do I need to become, right? I need to define what better looks like for me, and I need to determine who do I need to become. So I'm going to search out those traits, right? And who do I need to become? And as I search out those traits, what I'm really going to be doing is deconstructing the traits that currently make me who I am, looking for those that I think I need to add to me to become who I need to become. So we've talked about this on a number of occasions, the really breaking down or the deconstruction of who I am to become who I need to be.
And it's such a powerful thing, the deconstruction process. And I want us to clarify for our listeners that we're not talking about demolition.
Right.
Deconstruction really is that personal quest for things that are at the core. And those things are going to continue to stick with you. Those core elements, once you've analyzed them, you begin to understand them as strengths and weaknesses. And after you finish that process of deconstruction, what we're talking about is the reconstruction is putting those things to use in different ways, in different combinations, in different connections
Yes.
to other people in ways that enable them to be even more powerful strengths, and in ways, and particularly when we talk about the inclusive environment, in ways that compensate for the weaknesses.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's why it's so important not to have yes people around you, because as you're going through this process, you need people to be able to tell you, yes, that appears to be working for you, or no, that's not working for you. You need to reconsider this. You need someone who's going to constantly challenge who you're becoming so that they can help you become the better person that you're seeking to become in the future.
Reminds me of that concept, that board of directors concept, right? Mm-hmm. And, it's not a new concept, I guess, it's existed for all of time. One of the excellent examples from American culture is President Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And even there's a book written by him, forgive me for forgetting the author, but it's Team of Rivals, and how he surrounded himself with a cabinet that he knew would have tension, and would not be afraid to tell him what he needed to know. Mm-hmm. And that's really an important skill set for all of us. But there's a prerequisite that we'll certainly get into in our pursuit class, and that is you have to have a certain inner grounding, a certain personal comfort, that it's okay for your views to be challenged.
That's right.
And it's a skill. It's not something that any of us are necessarily born with, but it's something that any of us can develop. And we would certainly like to be able to share that as a part of this pursuit series with the listeners.
If you view this from the perspective of growth, then any feedback you get is good feedback. Whether it's counter to what you believe or counter to what you may not have believed, or whether it's helping you move toward your goal, all that feedback. And I think, some of our friends like to call it feed forward, right? But you have to be open to conversations that make you feel uncomfortable, because that's how we really grow. None of us know everything. And if we did, then we wouldn't grow. So in order to become a different being, in order to learn different information, knowledge, it's a matter of going places that we haven't been before. And that's what this is really about.
And it comes down to, there's a really important question that exists. If you really want to go down this road, if we want to pursue this path of better, we have to ask ourselves, when we become uncomfortable, who's uncomfortable with that? Mm-hmm. Right? And what we find a lot of times is that our life experiences have basically added up to give us a belief that things have to be a certain way in order for us to be okay. In order for us not to experience certain kinds of discomfort. Maybe it was an interaction where someone embarrassed you for some reason, you didn't know something, or you had a different perspective. In order for us to be okay, maybe we've constructed a world where that can never happen. Mm-hmm. And we see that mistake from a lot of leaders now, right? Like, they've developed this discomfort with ever being contradicted. Mm-hmm. So they lose the richness of different perspectives. So step one, if you want to pursue it, is to understand who's uncomfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And if you ask that question enough, you realize that, that discomfort doesn't mean that you're not okay, that you're not going to survive it. It's actually something that you have to go through. That is productive discomfort that's helping you break away from the constraints of that system of biases that you have put in place that say things have to be a certain way. And we just had a fantastic multi-year lesson on that in the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Is that a lot of stuff that we thought had to be a certain way, it didn't go that way.
That's right.
And for those of us that survived it, which is the overwhelming majority of the world, we are okay right now.
That's right.
We may be a little bit different than we were before. Things may not be exactly the same, but we're okay. And if we are willing to acknowledge the reality we find ourselves in, we find there are many paths forward.
That's right. That's right. What we have to realize in all that we go through, and when we consider times of chaos, when we look in chaos, what we find are patterns. And we have to be able to connect the dots to those patterns, right? And so even in the pursuit of personal mastery, there'll be some times of chaos because you're deconstructing, you're redefining, you're repurposing. And in that, you may think that, hey, man, is this really worth it? But you must have faith in what the patterns of the chaos are telling you, so you can connect those dots to either add or either subtract, because that's what this is really about. At the end of the day, it's adding and subtracting that will enable you to multiply, because oftentimes when you go through this deconstruction, reconstruction, what comes out the other end is probably exponential to who you actually really were.
You hit a big word. Well, it's a short word, but it's a big word in terms of constructing this thing. There is a huge faith component.
Yes.
And that faith is that you can be challenged. You have to have faith that it's a bigger world than what you've ever seen before. You have to have faith that with the assistance and co-creation of other people, things can be, better beyond your wildest dreams. So there's a huge leap of faith in the successful navigation of change. And so much of the realities that all of us build for each other simply has a goal of avoiding change. But change is inevitable. And so basically we're setting ourselves up for disappointment at every turn, because we're disappointed if we don't get what we want.
That's
and we're
right.
disappointed if we do get what we don't want.
right.
And next thing you know, that spectrum of what it has to be is tiny.
That's
and the world just doesn't accommodate that. There's too much of a dynamic there amongst all the different people that are trying to coexist. So, what we want to do is help people pursue this path of something different, greater, and better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And hopefully show people how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because all growth, all progress happens through being uncomfortable. I'll give you a quick story. I remember back in 2016, 2017, a friend of mine presented an opportunity to me just to go to Pakistan to speak. And so I filled out the application, sent it in. A couple of weeks later, got a call. I was approved to be a speaker going to Pakistan. So I'm talking to some friends. I said, well, you ever been to Pakistan before? No. Can you speak the language? No. Do you know anyone there? No. But I want to go do it. And so I started, of course, keeping up with what was happening in Pakistan. And, of course, there was some kind of terrorist activity or bombing. And I remember joking, they better get that straight before I get over there. And so I went. Didn't know anyone. I had escorts and armed, bodyguards. But the key was having faith enough in me and faith enough in the system and faith enough in the process to go through with something that was extremely uncomfortable because I didn't know anyone there, didn't speak the language even though they spoke English, had no idea from a geographical perspective, when they were taking me to different cities, where I was headed. And I had to fly there, right? And so, connecting through different countries, that all of that was a new experience. But what it taught me was that from a human perspective, we are all the same, right? That's what it taught me. But my life experiences grew because I just had faith in the process, the pursuit of wanting to pursue this opportunity, meet different people, learn about new cultures. And guess what? I was able to earn some friends who are still there that we communicate, every so often. But there was a lot of uncomfortability there because I have never been there. Wasn't sure about the food, wasn't sure about the water, which I learned about real quick. Didn't take long to learn about the water. I learned about the water, but the experience in and of itself enabled me to grow as an individual and to see different culture and get a better understanding of a different group of people who I never would have understood had I not had that experience. And I saw something a little different. As I'm down in the lobby of the hotel on the first morning, only thing I could think about is, our country tells us not to go to Pakistan. But all I saw were American businessmen. And that told me a great deal.
Yeah, I bet it did. I bet it did. All right, so we got to make this thing pragmatic a little bit. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to really put a true title on this thing this time. And I think it's probably obvious to everybody right now that we've got pursuit as a major theme. And so, it makes me wonder, so pursuit of what? Or how does pursuit become part of what this masterclass is? What does that sound like? When I think about pursuing, I mean, it's chasing something, going after something, trying to take yourself somewhere or make something happen. What does that, how does that translate into this master class?
That's a good question. And I'm going to challenge those who are listening to maybe give us a couple of ideas around pursuit and the title of this, just to help us, as we say in the consulting corporate world sometimes, help us make the sausage.
Yeah, that's right.
Help us make the sausage.
Yeah. So if this thing is going to be all about pursuit of what?
That's right.
Or is it just the concept of pursuit, or what? So we would be pretty sorry co-creators if we didn't at least invite our audience to participate in what this is. And we've had a lot of different requests for topics over the course of time we've been doing this. We'll soon be coming up on our first anniversary of Unlikely Intersections. But we've had these topic requests, and we've had a fair bit of input. So why not ask in this arena?
That's right.
So it's all about pursuit, folks. All about pursuit. And once we tag that title down a little bit better, then we begin to narrow the process, right? So what we've seen right here is basically almost a brainstorm session, a conversation, but it has a purpose in that we're really trying to settle on the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So you see that we have a methodology that underlies what we're doing. But in order to bring it to life, it's often best to have a case scenario, if you will, a specific use case in some terms of language, or a patient one, if you want to put it in epidemiologic, patient zero even. And so, that's kind of where we are now, I think, is, we're getting that feedback piece.
Yes.
And I hope some people have some crazy ideas.
I hope so. And let's make it real clear. Oftentimes it's the quote unquote crazy idea that's the best idea, right? So we want you guys to feed us your ideas around what this should be called, because ultimately the masterclass is going to be built to serve you and help you become better at what you are doing or who you want to be.
Like Steve Jobs said, only those crazy enough to think they can change the world actually do.
That's right.
And we need those ideas. You know, we need to get the input from you, the listener, of different ways to pursue this. And it's likely that as a part of the master class, you know, there's going to be open sessions, so we will be doing some of that on the fly. But we want to pare it down a little bit as we get started, just so we can start, you know, off on the right foot, because we got to get the fundamentals.
That's right.
There are a lot of fundamentals that'll start that will underpin any use case scenario.
Yes, absolutely. So we look forward to your ideas. We look forward to you helping us co-create. As I said a few minutes ago, help us make the sausage right, so that when you taste the sausage, it is delicious, meaning that it's effective and it actually helps you have a process to enable you to change, transform whenever you want to.
Absolutely. So I think that let's put two specific asks of our audience today. One ask is put forth some information about pursuit. What do you want to see us pursue? How do we want to construct that pursuit theme? How will that suit you? The second specific ask is, how is this experience going to be best for you in terms of time? Is this class going to be better servant of you if it is a series of half hours, if it is a 2-hour session at a time? What time frame really works best for you? Because we want to meet those needs in a way that allows a lot of interaction, that makes it possible for us all to pursue a better us.
Yep. And I just love those two asks, right? Because at the end of the day, people participate in what they help create. And so what we're asking you, the listener, to do is help us create this.
And in order to do so, you can find us on the Unlikely Intersections website at unlikelyintersection.com. You can find us on YouTube at Unlikely Intersections. You can find us on Facebook at Unlikely Intersections. Any of those sites are going to be the ideal place to put this feedback. Of course, we'll also take it personally at docphilipbrown.com or at Doc Philip Brown on LinkedIn if you want to do it that way, or Terry.
Terry Jackson, PhD, LinkedIn, Facebook inbox, all of that. We welcome your contribution to creating a masterclass that's for you, and it'll help us create it for you, and of course by you.
Thanks for being a part of the making of a masterclass at Unlikely Intersections. We'll see you next time.